Hello, welcome to today's show. Kind of a bonus one this week because we don't usually do a cryptid paranormal one on a Monday, but why not? So I have an amazing guest joining us today. His name is Brian King Sharp. Quick bio into him. He's the creator and host of Sasquatch Odyssey podcast. He's also the founder and CEO of Paranormal World Productions Studio, which currently features 6 amazing podcasts. The studio's lineup of shows covers cryptids, conspiracy theories, and even true crime. He recently published his new book, Sasquatch Unleashed: The Truth Behind the Legend, in March of this year. So welcome to the show, Brian, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate you asking me to be here. I'm glad to be here with everybody. I've been chatting in the chat. I finally was able to join the chat and say hello.
All right. You did it.
I did it.
You did it. Excellent. So, can we talk about the book first? Is that okay?
Anything you want to talk about, man. I'm ready to talk about the book.
Yeah, so this is your first book. Is it your first or new book?
It is the first, yes.
Oh, so first and new.
That's correct.
What inspired you to write it?
You know, it's one of those things. I've had a very interesting life.
Yeah.
To some people, I've talked about my experiences and journey and being in law enforcement for so long and interest in cryptids and now being a full-time podcaster, and people seem to be interested in the story. So plenty of people in my life, you know, you have friends and you're like, dude, you should write a book. I hear that a lot, right? But I wanted to do something a little different. I didn't want it to be all about me. There's a little bit of in the beginning about me and my story and my journey into the realm of Bigfoot, the phenomenon that is Sasquatch. But I wanted it to be more of a scientific sort of look and approach to Bigfoot research, because that's kind of where I'm at as far as my journey. I'm into the flesh and blood part of this phenomenon. I believe these things are some sort of relic hominoid, some kind of a upright bipedal relic hominoid of some sort. Yeah. So I wanted to make the book about some of those things and infuse some of my past experience as a police officer and investigations and the way that my mind works, and put that into a book for everybody who, if this is the first time you've picked up a book about Sasquatch, I wanted there to be a little bit of everything. I wanted there to be a little bit of history. I wanted you to know about some of the things in pop culture, some of the pitfalls that are involved. So that's what the book was. And I just sat down and started writing the book, and it just kind of, you know, it snowballs. You know, I started writing my story, and then it went into another chapter, and then another chapter and another chapter. So, you know, I did it a little differently. I've talked to people. I have friends who are authors.
Yeah.
And sometimes the process takes people years to write a book. I interviewed a guy recently on my show. I think his book was called The Tomato Fields. And it was a fictionalized story based loosely on his brother's Sasquatch experience. He had an encounter with Bigfoot, and it took him, I think, 5 or 10 years to put the book together. I think I wrote the book in 4 months, 3 to 4 months. Once I sat down and started writing the book, I just took some time every single day to make sure that I was writing. I sat down and said, I want to write at least 100 words today. Yeah. And then those 100 would compound. And then I ended up, you know, before I knew it, I was 15 chapters in and the book was basically done. So,
so I was going to say, did you struggle writing the book? But obviously the answer is no.
Yeah. I really didn't. I mean, there was some struggle because I wanted to cover so many subjects. There was a lot that I could have gotten deeper into. And in retrospect, I think I should have taken some more time and maybe putting some more effort into going a little deeper in some of the chapters. But I can always write another book. I think I'm planning on doing a couple of more books in the future, but I think I'm going to go a different route this time, because I found with Bigfoot research, and maybe, you know, when it comes to UFOs and even some of the other cryptid stuff, science is great, but people want to be entertained. And sometimes science isn't entertaining, right? So I'm writing an entire chapter on the perils of perception and pareidolia and misidentification. Some people don't care about that, right? Then you get into the scientific method, and I get into fossilization. Why don't we find fossils of Sasquatch? Well, why don't we find fossils of most of the animals that we know that existed here on Earth at one time or another? It's kind of a boring thing. For some people, it's like watching paint dry.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about writing, and this is really the first time I've ever really talked about this. So I guess it's an exclusive on your show. I'm thinking about doing a fictional series about Bigfoot and
Okay.
incorporate some of my experiences and some of the other things that I have gleaned from over 500 episodes of my podcast, Sasquatch Odyssey, interviewing people who have had experiences and those kind of things. And, you know, I think it would be a fun thing for me. I don't typically like a Bigfoot fiction, to be honest with you. I think there's a place for it. I think it's interesting. To me, it's just not one of those things that I've ever gotten into. But if I can incorporate some of the things that have actually happened to me and sort of write that book that everybody said, hey, you should write and incorporate your story, I think it'll be an interesting thing that people
kind of like based on true events, like a lot of documentaries.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, because you were saying about, like, you just mentioned about why there's no fossils, why there are no bones or anything found in Sasquatch. But it's like, I always go back to this one. It's like badgers in the UK. I've only ever seen 5 live badgers. I probably see about 20 dead ones a day. Yet we all know they exist. But if you ask people in chat how many they've seen, you could probably count on one hand between everyone. And these are wild animals that we know we can hear and are there, but they never are very rarely seen.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I was interviewing a guy a couple of nights ago. I'm originally obviously from the States. If you can't tell by the accent, I am not a British citizen. I am from the United States. I was born and raised in Georgia, and now I live in North Carolina on about 40 acres here in North Carolina. And I was talking to a gentleman who was from the area that I grew up in and where my interest in Bigfoot was born back in Georgia. I was talking to him. He's been a long-time researcher. He's been going to the same area and researching in Georgia, probably 10 miles from where I grew up. He's been researching that area since about 1989. And that's one of the things we talked about towards the end of the interview was I asked him, how do you deal with that as an investigator who has had multiple experiences and encounters with these things? He knows there exist. He's a knower, not a believer.
Yeah.
And I asked him, as somebody who's been doing this for 30 plus years, how do you handle that as an investigator when people say to you, well, there's no evidence that Bigfoot exists. Why don't we have a body? Why don't we have this? Why aren't there more photographs? Why aren't there more videos of these things? And he, to Tony's point, he made a very good point and said, why don't you go out into the wilderness right now, any wood you want, and find me a body of a squirrel, or find me a dead rabbit, or find me a dead mouse. We know all these things exist. Squirrels and mice and rabbits are real animals. But to your point and Tony's, how difficult is it for us to find those things? We know they exist. We see squirrels all the time running around in the trees, but you rarely ever see a body of one of these things. And I think it's just one of those things that it's a very, for skeptical people, and don't get me wrong, I'm a very skeptical person when it comes to Bigfoot and Bigfoot evidence. I think that's one of the allures of people who tune into my show. I take a very balanced approach to this. We call it drinking the Bigfoot Kool-Aid. I don't drink the Bigfoot Kool-Aid over here, but I am no longer a skeptic when it comes to the existence of Bigfoot. And that is a recent thing that has happened to me that unfortunately I can't get too deep in the weeds on because some things happened to me during a project that I was doing recently that I'm under an NDA and I can't really talk about. It will be out hopefully here in the next couple of months for everybody to consume, and it'll make more sense. And I don't like to be cryptic when it comes to those kind of things, but it is what it is. But I now have had enough experience that I do truly believe that these things exist. So once you get to that point, everything, all the other stuff that skeptics use to debunk and say, well, there's not enough evidence, or we can't find a body, so they don't exist because we would have found a body by now. All those questions to me are just out the window. And I'm now more focused on what these things are and proving the species. That's not a big thing for a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people who say, I don't want to prove anything to anybody. And I'm not necessarily trying to convince anybody that Sasquatch is real or prove it to anybody. It's for myself. I want to prove the species as a real species for all of the people, if nothing else, that I have interviewed. At this point, it's probably over 1,000 people, and more than 500 episodes have made it onto the podcast. I want to do it for them because there's a ton of people out there who don't believe that those encounters are real. People don't believe my experiences are real. And I feel some obligation as a podcaster and somebody who takes those kind of reports to prove that out ultimately for myself and then everybody else who's interested.
Yeah. Yeah. To go out there and say, look, this is the reason why I'm doing this. And it is to get a bit of definition as to what's being spoke about. But just quickly going back to the badgers again, it's the last time. It's like if you take away all the roadkill that you see, like you said, how many of these dead creatures are you going to find out in the wild? Pretty much one, maybe.
Yeah. And that's the truth. I mean, and that's one of the points Tony made was deer. I've been in the woods a lot. I live in the woods. I'm literally sitting in the woods right now as we do this podcast. Yeah. We live in a 400 square foot tiny house on 40 acres, surrounded by nothing but woods here in North Carolina. Yeah. I have never walked in the woods and found the body of a deer. And I have found some bone that I do believe are deer bones a couple of years ago while hiking on the property, but that's a rare occurrence. But I can drive 10 minutes down the road to get into town, and I'll probably see 3 dead deer on the side of the road that somebody smacked with a car or a truck, right? So, you know, and that's the argument that some people use. Why hasn't anybody hit a Bigfoot with a truck? Well, we don't know that that's not the case. I've heard stories where people have claimed to have done that. Right before we hopped onto this, I got a message from a lady. I'm actually speaking at a conference out in Missouri here at the end of September, at the end of this month. It's already September 2nd.
Yeah.
I'm going to be speaking out there at the end of this month, and she sent me she's a BFRO, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, investigator in Missouri. And she said that she just got a fresh report from a guy who claims to have shot and killed a Sasquatch about 10 miles from where she lives. And it's been assigned to her to investigate. So I can't wait to hear what comes out of this. It's not on the website yet, I don't think. I think it's something that's just been assigned to her. So I'm anxious to hear what this guy has to say. And certainly, you know, I'd love to get him on the show and talk about it because we've heard those stories before. I've heard tons of stories in the past about people who claim to have shot and killed these things. And, you know, it's the typical thing of, oh man, I was afraid I was going to go to jail for murder because I didn't know if this was a person and, you know, I buried the body or I just left it, those kind of things. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what this guy has to say because that's the first one of those I've heard recently about somebody actually shooting and killing one of these things. It's usually the opposite.
Yeah, because there's a big thing, isn't there, about the shooting of Bigfoot. He's I'm trying to word it right. But the repercussions of doing it, if he is telling the truth, it's going to be big.
Yeah, it would definitely. And we've done entire shows. I host several podcasts. Sasquatch Odyssey is a full-time podcast. That Bigfoot podcast I do with my co-host Wayne. We do a weekly show where it's not an encounters-based podcast. It's more like this. It's a conversation-based where we take a topic that's going on that's interesting to us or interested in with our listeners, and we talk about it. And we've done entire shows about some of those stories about people claiming to have shot Bigfoot. Yeah. And looking at the what ifs and what's the protocol there. That's one of the things that we've talked about as researchers here in the United States is I think we need to get together as researchers and as a community and somehow collectively figure out a way to, we'd call it a standard operating procedure of who do you call? Who takes care of that? What happens if you do shoot one and you need to trust somebody? How do you do that? Right? Who do you call? Some people would say if you're a conspiracy theorist, you're not going to call the police. You're not going to call the parks and recreation because a lot of people believe that those folks are in on some sort of a cover up and the body's just going to disappear. So who do you trust? I certainly have a list. You and I were talking a little bit about some of the folks that I've become friends with in Bigfoot. You know, I would call Cliff Barrickman. I would call Dr. Jeff Meldrum. I would call Darby Orcutt, who is up here at the University of North Carolina in my home state, who's doing some of the current DNA studies that are going on as far as Bigfoot testing is concerned. But that's it. I mean, I don't know how many other people you would add to that list or what you would do, but the one thing that Wayne and I and everybody I've ever had that conversation with agrees on is your life would change immediately
Oh yeah.
the second that that happens, and or you announce it to the world or any of those things. Troy in Tennessee in the chat says he's calling my co-host Wayne. Well, I would definitely call Wayne too. That goes without saying, Troy.
Do you know what? I wouldn't like to be the person that's claimed to have done this and all that. Just not, because there must have been people that have done it and just never come forward knowing what the outcome is going to be for them, because it's just going to, like you say, it's going to be completely life-changing. You're going to have to go into hiding or something. There's no, I think it's just too, what's the word? Like a taboo type of subject thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. But there are entire organizations here in the States that are devoted to collecting a specimen to prove these species to be real. The North American Wood Ape Conservancy that operate out in Area X are a group that have made no qualms about the fact that they're trying to take a specimen. And they've been trying to do this for over a decade.
Yeah.
They've shot at a couple. I've interviewed the majority of the folks that have been out in Area X that are a main part of that group. And I've talked to some of them who have taken shots at these things and do believe that at least one of them thinks he might have wounded one of these things at one point in time or the other. And people have a hard time with that. Just collectively as an organization, they have some stigma that is attached to their protocol of that being part of the research. Now, they go out and spend months at a time in Area X and have a lot of anecdotal experiences. They've documented plenty of rock throwing. They've documented audio, no real video and or photographs of these things, but collectively they're doing a lot of concentrated research. They've even done the tag research back in the day where they created this little barb tag, and they believed that a Sasquatch actually picked this thing up and it was stuck to them, and they tracked it until they lost it. So they've done a lot more, in my opinion, than a lot of people have, but there's still that stigma attached to killing one of these things. And it sucks. I don't want to be the person that pulls the trigger and kills a Bigfoot, right? But I do believe that science requires what it requires. And I think somebody is going to ultimately have to take at least one specimen, probably two, for science to 100% be all in on the fact that, okay, this is an undiscovered large bipedal primate that lives in North America, possibly in the UK. I've even talked to people in the United Kingdom who have claimed to have experienced these things. So it's literally touched every continent on the planet at some shape, form, or fashion as far as the Bigfoot phenomenon. But it's going to take a body. It's ultimately what it's going to be. Nobody wants to talk about it. I don't like it, but it is what it is. So I think we have to be honest about that as a community. And if you're really serious about proving this out, and again, some people aren't, it's just about they believe they exist, they know they exist, and we just need to leave them alone because they're doing fine. Here's the other flip side to that coin. And I should say this as a caveat, or not even a caveat, just a main reason for what the North American Wood Ape Conservancy is doing. And by the way, I'm not a member. I'm not carrying water for them. I'm not trying to advocate for them, but I do respect the work that they've done and continue to do. So I'm speaking from that aspect of what they're doing. They're talking about conserving the species. And what they believe is we have to do some long-term studies to know how the species is getting on and how many there are, what their food source looks like, and do they have enough room to live and breed and continue the population. And you can tell a lot by taking a specimen. You can then test the DNA, and DNA tells you a lot about where this came from, how it evolved, and what their current state might look like. So if nothing else, just for that reason, I think it's very important. And obviously, if you bring one of these things in on a slab and it's proven to be an unknown species by science, then everybody is going to have to accept the fact that Sasquatch is in fact real. And now we get down to the business of figuring out what they are and if they need our help, and can we help preserve the rest of the species.
Yeah. But it's like you said, you need that body to do the ultimate research, which it's a bit of a crappy job to be doing, but without it, it's like anything. You're not going to get any further down the road than where you are now. Because I've heard like Bobo and Cliff talking about same thing as what you was just saying about getting the research and putting it forward and getting the DNA and all that. But I know when is it Dr. Jeff Meldrum, people had sent him samples. This is going back when he first started, and he'd send them samples off to whichever lab, and then the lab loses the samples. But now he was saying that he's got people that he knows he can go to direct, where anything he sends, he knows he's going to get back and get a true response, and not like it was back in the day.
Yeah, and Darby Orcutt, I mentioned earlier, is one of those people that is doing what he's doing out here in North Carolina at the University of North Carolina. It is important work, and I think there are a lot of people, well, I know there are a lot of people out there who believe that, and I, to some degree, believe that. Could DNA prove out the species? Sure. I think it would be difficult. I think it's a hard road to hoe to think that they could do it with Bigfoot because it is such an important novel species. So many lesser species. If we're talking about a butterfly, for example, you and I and 7 other people that are in the scientific community could see a butterfly and maybe take a photograph of it, and science would say, oh yeah, that's a new species we've never seen before. But when you're talking about a giant upright bipedal hominid in North America that's not supposed to exist, it's going to take a whole lot more as far as the burden of proof is concerned. Could you do it with DNA? I know there are people that have talked about this. I've interviewed folks recently and over the last few years that have talked about doing some DNA studies. If you went out and collected DNA from, let's say 10 individual Sasquatch, and there are some investigators out there who are concentrating on that. Jeff Harding, I just remastered Jeff Harding's episode, and I think as we record this, and it aired yesterday on Sasquatch Odyssey. It's an interview I did from back in 2021. But Jeff had a really close-up encounter with a Sasquatch that actually hit him with a large tree trunk that it was carrying. Very compelling encounter. Jeff is definitely one of the people I respect in Bigfoot. I definitely don't doubt his story at all. He's subsequently written a book about his encounter called Pine Island Research, and that's the name of a show that he does on YouTube as well. But Jeff did that in his research, and I'm actually planning on getting him back on the show to talk about it because he's been doing this for a couple of years. He's doing inventive things like putting out these giant rubber balls that you would get at some, like over here it'd be Walmart or Target or some store, and putting some Velcro on it. And he's going out into an area where there's been reports and he's had experiences. And he's playing with this ball for 45 minutes and he's leaving it in this area, and he's had it moved multiple times, and he's collected hair samples. And that's one of the things Jeff and I talked about. If you could do that with, let's say, 10 individual Sasquatch, and you send those samples off and they come back unknown primate, well, then you know that you're dealing with something that's not human, and it's not a gorilla, it's not a chimpanzee, it's not an orangutan, it's not a greater primate. Because they don't exist here in North America, first and foremost, or they're not supposed to. Could you then prove that out if you could test the DNA and it comes back unknown, and then you got these 10 or 12 samples that are from individuals that are unknown individuals? Could you say with relative certainty that you're dealing with an unknown novel species that probably should be recognized by science? I think the answer is probably yes. But again, it goes back to that burden of proof. Again, if we were talking about a beetle of some sort, that would be enough times 10 or 20. But when you're trying to prove that Bigfoot is real and it's a relic hominoid that's not supposed to exist, that burden of proof goes up, and it always goes back full circle. It's like this circular argument that we have. It goes back to needing a body, and unfortunately, I think that's ultimately what it's going to take.
Yeah. So going back to the needing the body part, what do you think, if you don't mind answering this question, what do you think the government's involvement is with, I suppose, as a cover-up?
I tell you, that is something that I've answered so many times on other podcasts and even on my own show. And here's where I come down on that. Is the government involved in some way as far as knowing that Bigfoot exists on some level? I think absolutely the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of global, or let's just stick to the United States, is there some federal conspiracy going on to suppress this? I don't think so.
No.
And here's why I say that, or one of the many reasons I say that, I should say. I was a police officer for 16 years. I worked for a pretty large municipality. I was a City of Atlanta police officer. I left that job in 2016. You would be surprised what we didn't know on a regular basis, just on that level of government, right?
Wow.
And that is a case, I think, across, it runs the gambit when you're talking about any kind of a huge government like the United States government. Can they cover something up like UFOs for a long period of time? Sure. I think there was a lot of disinformation that has continued to go on throughout the years. Yeah. It's pretty much proven in the UFO field.
Yeah.
Bigfoot is a different sort of animal because, literally, pun intended, it is an animal. Could it affect the lumber industry? Certainly, right? The spotted owl is one of those things that you can go to and everybody points to and says, look what the spotted owl did. Look how many jobs were lost. I get it. The national parks. If the government came out and admitted tomorrow that there was some large bipedal primate that's walking around in the national parks that could potentially rip people apart, would that be problematic for the government? Certainly could be. But there's mountain lions, there's brown bear, there's black bear, there's already wolves. There are things out there in these national parks that they kind of put out general warnings about. Hey, you're in a bear area. Don't leave your food out at night. You know, could some of those things be dual purposed from the government? You know, maybe they're not always talking about bears when they're talking about food and securing your campground. Maybe they're talking about Bigfoot too, like wink, wink, nod, nod. Put your food up, you know. So, but I don't, ultimately the short answer to that is I don't think there's some big government conspiracy theory. Do I know that for a fact? Absolutely not.
No.
I'm just talking subjectively here. It's my personal opinion that they're not. Could be totally wrong. It could be another UFO thing. They could have specimens of Bigfoot running around somewhere in a bunker with a bunch of aliens flying around and alien ships at night. I don't know. I just doubt that. I'm very doubtful of that because I think the government has a hard enough time just keeping the doors open on the things that they are responsible for. I think on some levels, I've heard of stories like in national parks, people have experiences and there's footprints and they call out like whoever that person is that's responding from that post as far as the park ranger is concerned. And they go, it's a bear track. And they just smush the track out with their foot and they move on and say, yeah, you saw a bear. That was the end of that. Does that happen on some level? Probably way more common occurrence for people, but it's a generalized thing. It's not some huge multi-government agency cover-up of some giant thing like Bigfoot. I think individual park rangers just feel like it's probably a better idea to maybe tell people there's no such thing as Bigfoot. That's just a bear track. Don't worry about it. Yeah. And then it makes their job easier. So in my opinion, that's probably more the case of what's happening.
Yeah. See, I'm with you on that. I think that the government know about them, but I don't think they know too much about them. So they're just basically covering their own backs because they've not got, I don't know, I don't think they got the evidence that they want. They might have some DNA, but with that, they can't, it might not be enough that they can release any information to the general public. And then, like you said, if it was released to the general public, especially like the national parks and certain areas of the United States, would it stop people from going there? Would it stop revenue from going into these particular areas because people are not going to be going visiting? So is it the same way it's going to have a knock-on effect financially for local and national government?
And that's one of the arguments that I've had with people many times. Follow the money. The money is usually where everything leads back to, sure. But here's the thing about that. Brown bear, grizzly bears, black bears, all the other things with teeth that can kill you that are in the national parks don't stop people from going and hiking. They don't stop people from camping there. So, yeah, would it be one of those things where, sure, would Bigfoot probably keep some people out of the woods? I think probably so. But I don't think in general, most people don't care. Most people don't even pay close enough attention to anything that's around them to even be involved in the conversation. So I guess, I think it would be one of those things that, you could argue it both ways. I just personally, my opinion is I don't think there's this huge, vast cover up of it.
Yeah. See, I think it's different for us in the UK because we not have these big national parks. We're not used to wolves and bears and all these like mountain lions and all that. The worst we've got, again, badgers and foxes, and that's probably our worst predator. Do you know what I mean? So we don't have that. I suppose we won't have that understanding of what it's like to go in these national parks and walking around, even though you're going out enjoying yourself for a few days, but fearing for your life at the same time. If a bear comes along or a big cat, how are you going to fend it off if you don't have the ability to? So we don't have that. That's what we're missing, that knowledge, because we've never experienced it. It's not a day-to-day lifestyle.
Yeah. And it's been, I'd like to turn this around on you and ask you this question. How do you feel about the existence of Bigfoot, maybe just in general, but particularly in the United Kingdom? I was just over there. You and I were talking about it before we hit record. I was over there to speak at a conference back in July, and I got to go out in the woods into a couple of research areas, and I was surprised at how similar these areas, although smaller in area, were to what I experience here in the States. And I've been to multiple states and I've been to multiple countries looking for these things, but it was very similar to what I see here in the North Carolina area, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, even Alabama, and then the Pacific Northwest, and even in Canada. So I see the potential, and we did find some, what I would say tentatively could have possibly been something that was related to Bigfoot activity in these areas. There were some strange kill areas with a bunch of bones that looked like there was a lot of sheep in the area where I was, and these sheep had been pulled out and killed. And I'm asking the folks that were living in that area, what kind of predators do you have here? And that was their answer. We have fox. That's about the biggest thing. And there's no way that a fox is going to take down a 120 or 130 pound sheep. So something did this, right?
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me to see the countryside and that area, and I left it going, is it possible that Sasquatch could be in that area? Sure. What are your thoughts on, I guess maybe just in general about Sasquatch, and particularly in the United Kingdom? How do you feel about it over there?
So I know of people that have had a type of encounter. One of them was near to where I grew up in the north of England, in Manchester. So I moved down south 16 years ago, but I've been to a few different places where there are supposed well-known Bigfoot sightings, and we've gone for the day, we've gone at night, we've camped over, we've stayed for a couple of days, and just gone to these different. We've had strange things going on. One of the guys is in the chat, a guy called Simon. There's me, Simon, and one of the other guys sober, and a guy called, oh no, there's just us three at this point. And we've gone camping up on back of this mound. It's behind a pub, but it's overlooking a lot of the fields and that. And we was going to do like a campsite podcast. So I was just going to have the iPad rolling, just constantly recording. And I was going to interview these two and just have a chit chat, similar to what I do now, but outside. Anyway, the weather was that bad. You couldn't hear anything because of the rain on the tap. But Simon had gone down. He brought a pumpkin and he'd put LED, multi-LED light in it, so it's changing colours just for a bit of ambient effect. So we'd gone down to get this, probably about 20-25 foot away. So he walked down the hill a bit. As he's coming back up, he felt something running towards him. Society just turned and stood there. He couldn't see it. He could feel it. He couldn't hear it. The ground was very soft. There's a few branches in that and a few leaves, but it wasn't really making any sound. And he felt something run and stop right in front of him, but couldn't see or feel anything. It was winter time, so probably coming into winter, probably about another 4 weeks from now. Like it's the end of September time, so it was quite dark. This was about 9:30 at night. So he's had that, and we've had other strange stuff going on. But for me, that's the only time I've been in the vicinity of someone having a encounter that could possibly be a type of Sasquatch or bipedal humanoid thing going on.
I have interviewed several people from the United Kingdom who believe that they have experienced a face-to-face encounter with a Sasquatch.
Yeah.
And of course, the second I do those kind of interviews, most of the people here in the United States, they roll their eyes and say, oh, there's no way that could possibly be because they can't exist there and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And to their point, they could be right? But the people that I interviewed certainly have the understanding and belief that what they saw was real, and they don't have any other explanation for what they saw.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, if you believe those people, then you almost have to get to the point where, is it improbable given the United Kingdom's makeup and the small area and the food sources and all the things? I've done a lot of research and looked into it, and I'm kind of 50-50 on it, but
yeah,
it opens up other things for me because I've never thought that Bigfoot was anything other than flesh and blood.
Yeah.
However, when you have those kind of situations, it's why I always leave the door cracked just ever so slightly on the paranormal aspect of this phenomenon and some of the things that can't be explained through just a flesh and blood creature. And is it possible that some of those things are what these people are experiencing? Because I think that, although I don't necessarily believe that Bigfoot is anything paranormal or even some of the paranormal things that go on, sometimes even simultaneously with Sasquatch activity, maybe something that's completely exclusive to each other. But I think you have to at least have an open mind, and I've certainly tried to maintain that over the years, and say that, is it possible that there may be something else going on? Or these people didn't experience something flesh and blood. Maybe it was something else that they experienced altogether.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you consider that a possibility as far as what people experience, maybe even over here and or the UK?
Yeah, definitely. Because I was under for quite a while, like I said, when I used to watch Finding Bigfoot on that, and then I started doing this podcast and, like same as yourself, interviewing people, watching other podcasts, listening to them, and listening to all their listening to all the different accounts. I kind of just like put it all on the line, and then I just come to the conclusion: this is for me. This is just my own belief that I don't believe it's paranormal. I believe they're a living creature, whether they are originally from Earth, I don't know, but I believe they live here, eat, drink, crap, bleed, have young, all that kind of stuff. They do exactly the same as what we do, and I've moved away from them being anything to do with the paranormal. Maybe they have a connection to it. Maybe they have certain abilities that we don't have, like say telekinesis or something like that. Maybe that's part of their evolution, but I just don't feel that they're connected to like the ghosts, the orbs, the spirits, and all that kind of stuff. Not a direct connection that way that we did believe at the beginning. I do believe it is a real living creature, but like I said, whether they were brought here, there's already here, they come and go, I don't know. But I believe the flesh and blood, same as, and I've probably had that now for about 5-6 months. And that my opinion normally changes like every 2-3 minutes when I hear something new. It's like, Well, I'm totally wrong on that. I'm gonna have to backtrack now. But I've just stuck with this because it just nothing else really, not for me anyway. Nothing else makes sense than it being that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And again, it's one of those things that I'm so glad you said that about the backing up. And I've always said this on my show, and people have given me guff. I know you have an audience, so you get the emails. People, they'll disagree with what you say, or you say something one week and you say something different. You get those emails. And my answer has always been this. I think anybody who is intelligent enough to be a part of the conversation has to have an open mind, and you take all the information in. If anybody has this staunch, rigid approach to the research, whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's ghosts, UFOs, I don't care what you're talking about. You could be talking about researching new species of butterflies. If you can't be swayed by new information and take in new information as it comes in, and then reformulate your opinions and your theories and your hypotheses based on that, I think you're doing yourself and everybody that's involved a disservice, because I've always tried to do that. As new information comes into me and people share other things and I learn new things, I'm constantly adjusting what I think about Bigfoot, what I think about other cryptids, what I think about UFOs, what I think about ghosts and other phenomena. And so I think that's very important for everybody to remember who's interested in any of this stuff. You have to be smart enough and willing enough to take in new information and change your hypotheses. There are plenty of people, there's some in the chat right now who shall remain nameless, who don't believe that Bigfoot exists at all, I think. And everybody who has some sort of experience or whatever the case may be is just making stuff up whole cloth, and that none of it's real, and it's just all hoorah and hoopla, and none of that's real. And I disagree with that, because unless you've had experiences, you can't walk in my shoes and know the experiences I have and know what I've seen with my eyes and experienced. My experiences are real, and they can't be explained with paranormal phenomenon. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't high. There's none of these other explanations. So you're left with one thing. If it's not a person, it's not a hoax, it's not made up, it's not any of the things that are explainable. I'm a huge Occam's razor guy. I say this all the time. My audience gets tired of hearing me say Occam's razor, but it really is the fact with me. The simplest explanation for most anything that you're involved in, whether it's this kind of phenomenon or just life in general, if your tire goes flat on your car driving to work, the Occam's razor answer is you probably ran over a nail, right? It didn't get shot with a laser from a UFO. You didn't go into some alternate dimension where the tire just didn't have the air to inflate. No, the Occam's razor answer is you ran over something that punctured the tire, and now you have a flat tire. It's the same thing with Bigfoot. So I do that with everything that I talk about in Bigfoot. And when I have my own experiences that have convinced me that these things are real, that's the end of it for me. And frankly, I've said this so many times, I don't care what other people think at this point. I guess I'm old enough in my life to where I don't care if you believe me or not. Here's the problem that I have, though. And there are people that constantly want to say that everybody's full of crap and none of this is real. And it's like they know, and they're talking in facts, right? I mean, you said it earlier. It's one of those things that if somebody starts talking to you and they're telling you a fact, like they know everything about the subject, they're probably wrong, and they probably don't know anything.
Yeah.
I never say that. If you want to state your opinion, my opinion is you're full of crap, or my opinion is that you're telling a lie about your experience, or my opinion is that these things aren't real. But when you're putting things out there as fact, and it's been rolling in the chat here that several times this is a fact.
Yeah.
No, it's not, because you don't know everything, right? You don't have all the information. And if you're not willing to take in new information, now sometimes you have to trust the people that information's coming from. That's a difficult thing, right? If you don't trust where the information's coming from, you got to maybe trust but verify. But here's the thing. You have to be willing to take that information in and change your opinion. And some people just don't do that. And I have no use for anybody who takes that approach with Bigfoot, or frankly, anybody else in life. I don't have time for it.
Yeah. But I've just remembered that I did see I can't say it was a creature. It was a hotspot place in Bolton. I don't know if you know of it, Rivington. It might be mentioned to you at the conference. It's a big paranormal hotspot in the northwest of England, in Lancashire. And this was a few years ago now, probably around 2004, 2005-ish. I couldn't sleep at night, so me and a couple of mates gone for a drive. We're going over the top through the reservoirs and all that. And we're driving down. There's one house at the bottom of this road, and it's got a big double garage to the right hand side of it. And as we're driving down, I could see like the black masks, see the head, shoulders going down to the arms and legs, and it had two bright red eyes. Now, I don't know if it was a Bigfoot type creature. Didn't see any fur on it. I just seen it, got to the house, and I did a left because that was on the right and just forgot about it. Didn't make any noise. I don't know if it was just a reflection on the garage door. And it's like, as I'm driving down, because I had my full beam on, it could have been the lights casting a shadow from the bushes or trees or a wall or something that made it look like that. But it kind of like freaked me out. So I didn't hang about long enough to find out if it was that. But speaking to a couple of people that investigate in the area, there have been similar sightings around there from like the 1990s onwards.
Yeah, I think now that you mention it, I do recall somebody talking about, I don't know if they used the name of the area, but they told me about this hotspot area.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that has fascinated me, man. It like Dogman, for example, is one of those things. It's one of those cryptids that has just blown up here in the United States. There are entire shows that are devoted to nothing but Dogman experiences that people have. And it's been very difficult for me to check the box on that because it just doesn't make sense to me that there is essentially a werewolf. We're talking about a 7 to 8 foot tall werewolf that people are encountering. But I have interviewed people, and I say that because it sounds similar to what you described, more so maybe a Dogman versus a Bigfoot.
Right.
I've interviewed so many people that have had those kind of experiences, and I believe them. I mean, some of them are former law enforcement like myself, and we're certainly not special people just because we were in any kind of law enforcement. Don't get me wrong. There are some horrible cops out there, horrible former cops that I don't put any stock in anything they say. But in general, typically police officers and former law enforcement or former police officers are pretty good at seeing what they see, identifying it quickly, and then making a rational decision about what they're seeing, right? And a couple of the people that I've interviewed have been former police officers that have claimed to have seen something like a Dogman creature.
Right.
And in some cases, even able to produce photos of what they purport to be this creature. So I do believe that people are seeing those kind of things. And I'm saying all this to say there is a point here, I promise. To your point of the area that you were in and what you saw, could it have been something that you saw that may have not been flesh and blood? It could have been some sort of a paranormal thing. Because here's what I think. If Sasquatch exists, I think they do exist, and I think they are some sort of a relic hominoid. There's some kind of a primate. If Dogman exists, I don't know how that computes into being a real flesh and blood creature. It just doesn't make sense to me physiologically. Morphology doesn't match up with how they would walk. None of those things make sense. So
no.
Could people be having those experiences and it be something paranormal, for lack of a better term? I think paranormal is just one of those things that it's not normal for most of us, and we don't really know enough about it until it becomes normal, right?
Yeah.
Because some of the things that have happened in the past, lightning used to be paranormal to people until they figured out what lightning was. Thunder was paranormal until we figured out what thunder was. So maybe Dogman is one of those things that's just paranormal right now, and maybe we'll figure it out later on.
Well, yeah.
But there's so many conspiracy theories around it, and some people say that there's a government conspiracy that they've created them. You know, the United States government created them to fight in wars and those kind of things. That's a road that I just can't really blaze a trail down. Yeah. But to the point, do you think it's possible that what you saw could have been something more paranormal and less physical?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, like I said, because of the shape of it. And at the time, I wasn't doing any of that. I was into the paranormal, but I always have been from being like 3-4 years old. And it's just at this particular point in my life, it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I knew that there's stuff going on. I was still seeing things like UFOs and ghost spirits and what have you, but this one night, it was this dark figure was stood in front of a garage door, bright red eyes, and I'm like, nope, and just booted it left, and that was on the right. I didn't even turn around, didn't go back there for years. I think it's about 2 years before I went back to go and check to see if there's anything that would outline on this door, and there was nothing there. That was it. That was all I did.
Can't say that I blame you, my friend. That is not something that's I'm looking forward to seeing anytime soon. And that's one of the things that, again, it goes back to some of the eyewitnesses that I've talked to that have experienced things like self-illuminating eyes. That's something that I've heard over and over and over. And I can, again, I'm not going to get really in the weeds about this, but I can now say that I've seen something very similar to what other people have seen, right? So it's one of those things where I can't explain it, but again, could it be something that these creatures have evolved to be able to do? I don't know, but it's one of those things that you have to take seriously, in my opinion, because so many people have had that kind of experience. It doesn't make sense in my brain how something's eyes could self-illuminate and give off its own light if it's just a flesh and blood creature, but people report it all the time. So again, are they seeing something that may be something different than the physical creature? Because when they have that experience and you see, like you saw these red eyes, but you know, it may not have been a big physical creature that was standing there. It could have been something different, but there are people without fail who say this was a real live creature that I saw. It was 8 feet tall, had all these characteristics, and its eyes were glowing red, blue, white, amber.
Yeah.
All these different colors. So there's so much there to bite into. And that's honestly, that's what keeps me coming back over and over and over.
Yeah.
People ask me, do you ever get tired of hearing the stories? Do you ever get tired of the subject? And the answer is absolutely no, because the mystery is always going to be there.
Yeah.
And frankly, I don't think it's never going to really be solved unless there is a proven species by science and people ultimately have to say, yes, this is real.
Yeah. I'll just tell you this other one quickly. Just when you mentioned about paranormal and Dogman and South Glowing Eyes, I seen a couple of years ago now what I believe was an Anubis type creature. So I'm driving along, the shortest story of it, version of it possible, going down this country road. There's pig farms on the left and right. The farm opens up on the left. Where the farm opens up on the left for the tractors to go in, that's the start of the woods. Only short woods, but like it triangulates and goes out like that. Then it goes, elongates and stops at the end. As I'm coming round, it was around November time. So all the bark on the trees were dry, and there's something that's like really dark HD color stood in front of the tree. And as I'm coming round, the road kind of bends, and I'm level, eye contact with this, look like a upright Doberman, but the color of its eyes, I've never seen that color before. It was like a greeny, orangey, yellow, like a fluorescent. I haven't got anything that I've never seen anything that color. A bit like, so like the orange on your logo, like the brightest part of that orange, but put some fluorescent green in with that as well.
That's really strange.
And I've seen it from like the waist up, and the message in my head from that was, shit, he seen me, and then it just vaporized, like wasn't there, just vanished, completely gone, nothing to be seen. Rang a guy that used to speak to regular about 5-10 minutes later, as it was like trying to go like work out in my head what it was. He goes, "Did you not get out and go and have a look?" Like, are you mad? No, I lock my doors and get driving. Why would I want to get out and have a look? It'd be the last thing I ever did. It's like, no. And that was in a place called Kings Lynn on the east of England, like Suffolk, Norfolk, around that area, which is quite that. The whole of that area is so much paranormal stuff going on. Not too far from Rendlesham, and all across that way, you've got a lot of the UK, US air bases over there as well, like Lakenheath, Mildenhall. So there's a lot of stuff going on around that area. But yeah, it was there, then it wasn't there, and the eyes and the mind speak, and then yeah, a lot to take in about 5 5 seconds worth of going on.
Yeah, that is definitely a lot to take in. And, one of the weirdest stories that I've heard that would be considered, I guess, a dog man type creature recently. I had another podcaster on the show, and he's telling me the story of driving home late one night. He and his coworker had got to leave early. It was like on a Friday night. They finished their work early. Their boss let them go, and they were work friends, but not very close friends. They're live in the same area. So one of them was ahead of the other one. And this guy was behind his work partner. And he sees the taillights of this car in front of him, which was his coworker, swerve, like it swerved around something in the road. He very quickly, he's moving at a pretty good clip. He gets to the same part of the road and he has to swerve because in the road he sees something, but it can only be described as a very tall, it would have to be probably 7 foot tall or plus, because where the head of this creature should have been was like above the top of his vehicle.
Wow.
And I say where the head should have been because it didn't have a head per se or arms. Oh. It was just this upright, tall, walking creature. At first he thought it was something like with a cloak, a person with a cloak or something.
Yeah.
And he goes by it really fast, and it goes right past his window on his driver's side of his car. And he looks up and he sees I think he said maybe a quarter to a half a mile ahead, his coworker's pulled off. His car is off the side. So he drives up and he's like, dude, like, what did you see? Well, I saw that headless thing. Like, what was up? So they kind of agreed. They saw the same thing. So he's automatically like, okay, I don't think I'm crazy because my coworker saw the same thing. We both agree it didn't have a head. So they decide to get brave. He's like, I'm going to go back and check out that area. So they get in the cars, they go back, they drive to the area where the general area in the road. They stop probably 20, 25 feet from where they saw this creature. They get out of the car. This guy that I'm doing the interview with, he walks up and he sees a large, what he describes as like a wolf creature that looks dead, laying in the middle of the road. So he thinks, okay, this is weird. I saw this headless thing, and now there's this big dog that wasn't there a minute and a half before, right? Because all this happened very quickly.
Yeah.
And now there's this like dead dog thing. So he starts walking towards it. And he said this thing stands up on 2 legs. It's like 7 feet tall. And he describes basically a dog man. It's like this Anubis type looking creature that just turns around and bolts into the woods. Like, I think he said, I'm hoping I'm not screwing his story up too bad. He told it so much better than me because it was his story. This thing basically, I think he said it drops down on all fours and takes off like a shot into the woods. And I think the weirdest part of this entire story, you're probably going to think I'm absolutely mad. They're standing there talking about what had just happened. And he says, Brian, there was this little field mouse that was standing on the road in front of us. And it was just licking its hands, its paws, and cleaning its face. And it's just looking at us like just a step or two away. He said, to the point where I literally, he like went down with his foot and kicked the thing, like nudged it. Yeah. And it just acted like he wasn't messing with it. Right. And it was just the weirdest group of experiences that all happened, like you said, in a very short amount of time. And he's like, I don't know what to make of that. And this is a sane guy. Like, he's wife and kids. He's got a job. He's otherwise a perfectly sane person who has no reason to make this up and tell the story.
No, see, I've had that when we've been out investigating with animals. There's one, it's actually on one of the live streams where there's a baby rabbit at these church ruins, and I just go over and pick it up. Doesn't run off. There's no other rabbits about. And I'm like, oh, well, we're expecting that. So I'll put it back down. And as I put it down, it'll run like a hop, 2, 3 steps, stop, turn around, look over its shoulder at me for me to follow it. Literally. That has never, ever happened in the 51 years other than this one time. And I've got video evidence of it all.
Well, I asked this guy, I said, okay, my brain is working overtime here, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I asked him, and he has some theories. He said, here's what I think. This is the best thing I can come up with is the creature that he saw first might have been either, this is wild, the mouse that he saw was maybe turning into this creature, or this headless creature was trying to form into this creature that they eventually saw laying on the ground. Or here was his alternative theory. Maybe this thing was somehow trying to scare them or get some kind of a reaction out of them, and they didn't really react the way that it expected. So maybe the creature ended up turning into the mouse. I know it's crazy. I know it's out there, but it was one of the wildest stories that I have no other explanation for. I don't know what you do with that. I don't know what box you put any of that stuff in, but it was a wild, wild experience. And like you said, there are other wild stories that people tell with strange animals or normal animals behaving very strangely in situations that just don't make sense.
Yeah. There's another point that we had another area near where I live. There's a big black mass, and we're moving down, and we could an owl, I think it's either a crow and a magpie, and something else. And as we're moving down this path, the animals are moving with us. And I'm thinking they better not be trying to bait us out. But they just, as we moved, they moved. And every time we stopped, they made a noise. And we're like, what the hell is going on? It was just, nothing was making sense. It was like they became part of our group sort of thing. So they knew that this other thing was there. They could probably see it better than we could, because we could just see like the outline of this probably about 4 or 5 foot tall, big black looking thing. And we're just slowly moving away from it, and the animals are moving with us. It was odd. It was very odd.
Yeah, there's so many wild experiences and so many crazy things, man. I've had UFO experiences, and I've talked to people about UFOs on the show. I used to do a lot more UFO stuff before it just all became about Bigfoot. My audiences, they're all about Bigfoot. So when I mix other stuff in, I've actually created other shows just so I could talk about that stuff, because it does interest me, because I've had those kind of experiences.
Yeah.
But when you talk about UFO stuff in connection with Bigfoot, or any of the other strange things, maybe even Dogman, or like the story I just told from the gentleman I interviewed about the weird dog and the strange mouse situation, I just don't know that I used to separate it, and I still pretty much compartmentalize most of that stuff as, yeah, there's Bigfoot activity going on, and I'm not so sure that the lights that you're seeing or some of this other stuff has any bearing on that, or vice versa. But where are you on everything being connected? Because that's something that I've had Preston Dennett. Preston's pretty big in the UFO community.
Yeah.
He's written tons of books. I've had him on multiple times.
Yeah.
And I would say that to Preston all the time, and he kept saying, and I've said it so many times on the show, Brian, everything is connected.
Yeah.
Everything is connected. Do you believe that there is a common thread? Whether, and I'm not saying Bigfoot is an alien per se, but do you think some of these strange phenomena somehow are intertwined with each other when it comes to Bigfoot, cryptids, and UFOs?
Well, because I've interviewed Preston a few times. He come on once teaching us how to try like the first steps of astral projection and all that. But one of the main questions, I think it was about the second or third time that he came on, was talking about the connection between UFOs and cemeteries. And he brought that connection. And I'd never heard of this before. It's not that, it was just something I'd not thought about because no one had ever spoke about it. And it is like, well, now, yeah, that makes sense. But with your question, is there a connection? I did start to think that there was a really strong connection between everything that was going on. But now I'm kind of like, I think 75-80% of it is connected. I'd say there's about 20% that isn't. So I'm going, well, this is where people start, this is where I start getting the emails. I think that the afterlife, spirits, ghosts, whatever your take is on them, I think that is something completely different to everything else that is actually going on. I do think it is connected, but not a direct connection. Not an, like you can link, you can go from one to the other to the other. It's not like a chain. I think it's the side by side, like where we've got normal and paranormal. I think it's more like that, but there is a direct path between them. I don't think there's a direct connection between them.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. And this is the other thing that I've had so many conversations about recently with a ton of people is people ask me, do I believe that you can become marked, I guess, for lack of a better term, say when people see Bigfoot, or you have some sort of a cryptid experience or a UFO experience or a poltergeist experience, do I believe that you can be marked and you're more apt than to have more of those experiences for whatever reason in the beginning? And I think to the point we were just talking about, if you would almost have to believe there's some sort of connectivity between all of these experiences for that to be the case, because my answer has always been this. I don't necessarily think that anybody becomes marked, because to me that would be sort of a higher power controlling these kind of things for me.
Yeah.
For that to, like, a person is selected to have these kind of experiences. And I don't necessarily believe that, but here's what I do believe. And my answer to this has always been, and I certainly want to get your take on this, but my take has always been, if you have an experience of any sort with the paranormal or with a cryptid or Bigfoot, whatever the case may be, I think people are more apt to then be open to more things.
Yeah.
And I think the more you look for things, the more you find them. Some people say the more you look, the more things look back at you. I think the more things that you look for, the more things you find, because you're opening yourself up to it. And I said it recently. I was just doing some editing on a podcast episode that I'm going to air here in the next week or so. Yeah. And I said this during the podcast episode, and I think it's a pretty poignant point to make when it comes to all this stuff is, it's like everything else in your life. If you're a horrible person and you're horrible to other people, typically other people are going to be horrible to you, and you're just going to meet more horrible people. But if you open yourself up to, it's almost like manifestation. I believe there's something to that. I don't necessarily think you can just manifest money, but if you change your mindset and say, I want to be rich, or I want to have more of this, subconsciously your brain is going to say, okay, we're going to work towards that. You're not necessarily just, there's nothing out there in the universe that says, oh, Brian said he wants to make an extra $2 million this year, so we're just going to give him that.
There you go.
But if I change my mindset and I'm thinking that way constantly, guess what Brian's going to do? I'm going to physically do the things that are probably going to, they may not manifest or they may not get me to $2 million, but I might make a whole lot more money than I've ever made before. Or if I want a new car, if I want to meet a new friend, whatever the case may be. So I think that ultimately is a less conspiratorial or a less woo out there, high strangeness answer to when people have experiences. I think you're just more apt to look for more of those experiences and be open to them. Because when I first started interviewing people on my show, again, I was very skeptical about everything. And I've softened that quite a bit recently and in the last couple of years. But everybody who would come on and say, yeah, I've had Bigfoot experiences. Oh, have you seen a UFO? Oh yeah, I had those experiences. Have you seen a dog man? Oh yeah, I've seen a dog man. Now, some of those people pulling your leg? Are they making that stuff up? Sure. But the people who really do have those experiences, I believe, are just more open to having them, because now I said it recently, I have become that person. I can no longer look at those people and say, that's way too much. Not one person could have all these experiences, because guess what? I grew up in a haunted house. I've had experiences with what I believe to be ghost entities, possibly demonic entities in the past when I was a kid. I have had multiple UFO experiences. I have had multiple experiences with Bigfoot.
Wow.
So I am that person, right?
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not making my stories up. I know that I'm not crazy. So I think once you have those kind of experiences and simply look up, that's what happens to me when I'm seeing UFOs and things that I can't explain in the sky. It's because I go out at night and I watch the sky. How many people do that? How many people truly go in the woods and look for Bigfoot or other cryptids or signs of these things? If you're not looking, you're not going to find it, right?
No.
You got to turn those rocks over.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because I've had first encounter when I was 4 and UFOs. I believe I removed an implant from one of my nostrils. Shadow people, full body apparitions, people talking to me, shouting my name, being touched, pushed, all sorts, taps turning on in the house, lighters lighting up, just all sorts of stuff, just random things that don't happen on a normal basis. So I get exactly where you're coming from, but it's like you said, I don't do it for people to believe me. That's down to, if they want to believe me, they can believe me. That's their call. But like I was saying to you earlier, the reason that I started doing this was through watching, like, Finding Bigfoot and some of the other podcasts and TV shows, and it was more to, if I'm open to tell people about the encounters that I've had, and each one will trigger another one, and it constantly remembering all the different things that have actually gone on, then hopefully that'll help those who struggle to talk about their encounters and just be more open about it. And about me, think by looks to the ridicule and all that, just say it as it is, and you are who you are, and you know what you've encountered. Because this is another thing, even if you've encountered it and it was in your mind, it was an hallucination, you still had the trauma, you still had the emotions, everything has still happened. You've still gone through that encounter. So it's still an experience, regardless of whether it was in there or out there. So it's still a real thing, and that's how it is. And I think if I was to come on and do a podcast and not talk about anything I've done or deny everything, then it's hypocritical of me to do that and expect everyone else to do it instead.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And that's happened to me recently. I have struggled in the past with some of the things that have happened to me and putting them out on the podcast because there is a ridicule factor. I mean, I've had to face this this is my full-time job. This is how I make my money. My podcast pays my bills. I am fortunate enough to be in a very small group of people who have been able to make this work and live comfortably doing a podcast.
Yeah.
I make no qualms about that. And here's the thing about that. In addition to this being my job, it is a passion for me. And it's something that I'm truly out in the field seeking answers for myself and then ultimately to share it with my audience. And when I cast some footprints late last year, back in October, and they turned out too good. Honestly, I've cast other footprints on our land and around our land here in North Carolina that just turned out to be shit. They weren't great cast, right?
Yeah.
But these turned out really good. It was a perfect scenario. And I struggled with talking about them. I ended up putting the photographs in the book first because I didn't want to just deal with the stuff that comes out on social media. Cliff now has the prints. You and I were talking about it earlier.
Yeah.
And Jeff Meldrum, Dr. Meldrum, is taking a look at the prints as well. I just sent those out to Cliff a couple of weeks ago. But I struggled with that. But to your point, I said, I have to put this out there because if it happens to me, I've chosen to be a public figure and put myself out there on a podcast. And I ask people to do that every single day.
Yeah.
I have to be able to put this out there regardless of what people say. And there are plenty of people who disagree. People don't like what I have to say. They don't agree with my evidence. They don't believe some of the stories, whatever the case may be. I don't care at this point. I'm just at the point where I'm going to put it out there and you have to make up your own mind and make the decisions about what you believe and what you don't. But I think it's important ultimately for you, for me, and everybody who's had these kind of experiences within reason that can safely come forward and share their story. I know there are people in positions that, frankly, if they were to tell their stories and things that happened to them on a podcast, they probably wouldn't have a job the next day. And I respect people have to take care of their family. So within reason, that's why I do the show, because I think it's so important for people to hear that other people have had these kind of experiences. Because what happens, I get it all the time. I wasn't going to come on and tell my story until I heard Joe last week on your show. He saw the same thing I saw almost exactly. It was 15 years apart and he was in, 5 states away from me, but it was a very similar thing. And I want to talk about it. And that's what these kind of shows, in my opinion, do for the phenomenon and people who experience the phenomenon.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what not the main thing, but the bigger picture of what this is about is just to get them people to come forward. Because I interviewed a couple of people, they've gone off the radar since, but there's one guy, he has multiple abductions, and he had polycystic kidneys or something. So when he was getting abducted, this thing kept happening, and he didn't want to talk about it, but he came on, he spoke about it, and he explained. And when he went to the doctors and the consultant and found out what was wrong with him, it was literally at that point where all the abductions stopped. They basically threw him out of the ship and back into his bed, and that was it. And it is because of the condition that he got, and he's had it like ever since. So, and it was a struggle to get him on, but he said once he recorded it, because that was a pre-record, so we recorded it, put it out. I sent a copy of it to him first, and he said he was so glad just to get it out there. But he was scared of the ridicule and what people was going to say. I'm like, doesn't matter what anyone's going to say. This is your story for you. You're not putting this story. You're not putting this out for anyone else. You're putting it out for yourself to prove to yourself that this is real. This is what happened. If anyone believes you, that's a bonus. If they don't, they don't. I don't expect everyone to believe everything that I've encountered, but I know what I've seen and how real it was to me. And I think that's it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it has to be for you first. I think for a lot of people, I know it's very cathartic to get those things off their chest, because people tell me all the time, I can't even talk to my wife, or I can't talk to my husband because they think I'm a nutter, right?
Yeah.
So if your own partner thinks you're crazy, I may be the only person, or you may be the only person, or some other podcaster may be the only person that they can share that part of their life with. And it's important to have that kind of outlet. So there's a couple of questions I wanted to get to. I think you starred them, and I know
I'm keeping my eye on the time, and I'm seeing how long we've got, because we've got like just over 10 minutes left.
I'm a consummate podcaster, man. I'm always trying to control the narrative here.
So no.
The first one was from Nickname that came with Welcome Brian.
There we go.
Mothman.
What is your take on Mothman and the link to disasters additionally? So I'm just talking about like Point Pleasant and the Silver Bridge.
I'm going to pan slowly down to my cryptids tees here because I'm wearing my Mothman shirt. So what a fitting question.
Mothman is my favorite cryptid.
I love Mothman. I love the story. You know, I've never been able to really wrap my brain. It goes back to sort of the Dogman thing. I'm not sure that, I don't know how that could exist and be a physical, or simply a physical flesh and blood creature. But I've talked to people like Lon Strickler I've had on, long-time Fortean researcher. Lon is phenomenal. He has a amazing plethora of information on his website. But they've done a lot of deep dives and done some astral projection and other things that they believe they've connected to some of these.
Yeah, didn't he call them the unseen? Is it the unseen he calls them?
Something along
these flying cryptids in Chicago. I've interviewed him a couple of times.
There's a whole bunch of those things going on.
They made the connection to them.
Yeah.
But my thing with Mothman is the whole, like the John Keel book, is everything that was going on in Point Pleasant at the same time with the TNT, with Indrid's code and the phone calls and the going into the newspaper offices and the men in black turning up. It was just a constant barrage of all these different things all happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's a very cool story. I'm just not sure that I could get there on. I don't know enough about Mothman to have an informed opinion about them. I think people are seeing some sort of creature. I don't think they're all misidentifications. I'm just not sure exactly what they are.
No, thank you for that. Next question is from Wayne, Fire Spirit, and he's asking, Bigfoot and Dogman, same species or different or variations of?
I think they're definitely 100% different. I think I used to say, and I still believe on some level, that some of the dogman encounters are possibly misidentifications of whether it be Sasquatch or other animals. I've even talked about it half tongue in cheek, somewhat jokingly in the past about wild kangaroos that are loose here in the United States. And some of the descriptions that people give are very similar to what these big kangaroos, when they're standing up on their hind legs, look like. So I've even said that, could it possibly be that some people have seen kangaroos in the wild and mistaken them for dogman? Possibly, but probably not all of them. So I think they're definitely different. And I think maybe some of the dogman are probably some kind of a misidentification of maybe a Sasquatch or some other creature, but I don't think they're one and the same.
Yeah, because that kangaroo is what, 7 foot plus when they're on the back legs, or even when they push up on the tail, like 8 foot plus. So, yeah, you don't want to mess with one of them, do you?
Definitely not.
No, right. Next one is from Troy in Tennessee. I don't really understand this, but I'll put it out. If Bigfoot isn't real, how do you explain the sightings all over the world of creatures of similar description?
That may have been something more for somebody else in the chat, but I can answer that. I do believe that it's real. And all the sightings that we've talked about, again, like you said, whether they happened in somebody's brain or they actually happened as they believe in a physical manifestation, regardless, they did happen. And I believe, I've already said plenty of times, I think Bigfoot is real. So that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. And then last one is from Paranormal Pixie, aka Lara. Has Brian talked to Greg Lawson? He wrote an amazing book called Letters from Mothman.
I have not, but I will add him to my list of folks to get on the show. I think that would be an awesome conversation. I love Mothman. Obviously, I love the lore. I love the connection to Point Pleasant. Obviously, the tragic events is not a great thing, but
no,
it's a fascinating story, and I'm always down to talk more about any cryptids, frankly.
Yeah. Have you spoke to Steve Ward? He works part-time at the Mothman Museum. I've spoke to him a couple of times. He'll be a top guy to get on. He moved from, I can't remember where he was living, but he moved to West Virginia, like Point Pleasant or West Virginia, just for this job.
Wow.
It's like, what a job.
It's dedication, man. It's dedication.
Yeah, that's the sort of place I'd like to move to. So yeah. I've got one final question for you. So I'm just checking on the time. So you said you've had Bigfoot sightings. How many in total that you can 100% say it was a Sasquatch type creature?
I got to be very careful with my words here. I would say this. I've had at least 5 experiences now that I can 100% say in my mind with certainty were related to Bigfoot.
Wow. And was each one different?
I can't wait to actually talk about them. The majority of those happened while I'm under this NDA that will hopefully be, like I said, this project should be wrapped up in probably the next 8 or 10 weeks. So I'll be able to fully commit and talk about it completely because I'm busting at the seams.
It's killing you, isn't it?
It's absolutely driving me insane. But I out of respect for the project and obviously my NDA, I don't want to talk about it. But and very different. I think I heard you say very different experiences. Some of the I could talk about a couple of the things really quickly. I interacted with what I believe to be Sasquatch while I was on expedition up in Todd Standing's research area with him last year. Wow. Wood knocks. I had rocks thrown at us a couple of times.
Yeah.
Overnight while we were sitting out at the campfire, I heard what sounded like samurai chatter, kind of this in the woods kind of thing. No other explanations whatsoever. We were 18 to 20 miles deep into the woods in Radium, BC, Canada. There was definitely nothing out there other than us and possibly Sasquatch. And the cool thing about it is, I don't know how familiar you are with Radium and Todd Standing. I have my issues with Todd. Anybody who listens to the show knows how I feel about Todd. But the research area, I've said plenty of times, I believe there's Sasquatch there. I believe that I have interacted with them on a couple of occasions when I was up there for a week last year. But they've recently put up cameras Logan, who I've had on the show a couple of times, has been up on research with Todd probably 3 or 4 times at this point. He developed this app. It's called Discovering Bigfoot. You can get it on. And again, this is not mine. I'm not getting any money from this. I'm not. You can check it out on Apple or Android. It's called Discovering Bigfoot. You get the app, and they've got 2 cameras up currently in the radium research area. And you can sign up and you can see these live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And Logan literally sent me a video, I think 3 or 4 days ago. He was going through some of the archived footage because it's a lot. Obviously, these things are running 24/7.
Yeah.
He found a rock being thrown out of the woods. You can clearly see it zinging out of the woods where there's nothing there. There's nobody there. Wow. A rock being thrown at one of the campers that they have out there that the expeditioners stay in, and you can hear it. He's got the audio attached to it as well. So interesting stuff, but I definitely think that radium is active, and I believe I interacted with Sasquatch several times while I was up there last year.
Wow. I've literally just downloaded the app. It comes straight away. Cool. So I'll be having a look at that. So massive thank you, Brian, for coming on. Absolute pleasure. And hopefully you'll come back on and talk about what you can talk about when you can talk about it.
All my undisclosed things and undisclosed locations with undisclosed people.
Yes. So massive thank you. And I want to say thank you to Nickname for getting for speaking with you was it in Bristol, around that area, when you was in the UK in July?
Yeah, let's call it like Somerset, Bridgewater area.
Yeah. So because like I said, I had tickets to go there, but just didn't get the opportunity to go. So, like I said, I do apologize for that. But yeah, Nickname put me in contact with you, and we got it started. And absolute fabulous guest to have on. Thank you so much, because we don't get that many Bigfoot people coming on. Bigfoot people, is that a thing? I don't know.
I'm a Bigfoot person.
I've had a few, but I could probably count on one hand how many people that talk about Bigfoot. There's you, there's BMR Rob, Jessica Jones. It was there's 5 in total that have come on and spoke about Bigfoot. So
elite company, my other Bigfoot folks. I love it.
Very. So yeah, massive thank you again for coming on. So thank you everyone in the chat. Thank you for everyone that listens to it now on podcast. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the others. They're the only ones that I use, so I don't know the names of anymore. And yeah, that's it. Don't forget, join us on Wednesday at the same time. We're going to have Nathaniel Gillis on. And then on Friday, we have Paul Howard from Host for Ghosts joining us. So a busy week this week. Are you okay to hang on after we come off air, Brian? Is that all right? Just for 2 minutes?
Sure.
Perfect. Right. So thank you, everyone in the chat. We'll see you on Wednesday with Nathaniel Gillis. Have a wonderful 48 hours. And we'll see you then. So take care and goodbye.